I'm honored to welcome you to the panel discussion Gombrowicz, Taming the Place, Untamed Places. In this way, we will inaugurate a series of events planned to take part on May, June, and July. And this is entitled Gombrowicz in Berlin, is co-organized by Pilecki Institute in Berlin and the Museum of Witold Gombrowicz in Wsola, with the support of the Ministry of Culture, National Heritage and Sports. The meeting will be held in English with a live translation into German and Polish. And at the end of the panel, there will be an open discussion. There is also a possibility to ask the experts their questions using Q&A. It will also be in English, but you can write your questions in any of three languages, in Polish, in German, and in English. I'd like to welcome warmly our participants in the order of appearance. Professor Alicja Boliński, Boston University, Professor Ewa Kobyłecka-Piwońska, University of Lodz, Mr. Olaf Kuhl, writer and translator from Berlin, Katarzyna Kula, Espace Muséal Witold Gombrowicz in Vence, Małgorzata Smoron-Goldberg, professor from University Paris-Sorbonne, and my name is Anna Spulna. I represent Museum of Witold Gombrowicz in Wsola. There will be also two short films, and the first of them is from curator Tomasz Tyczyński from Wsola.
Dzień dobry, nazywam się Tomasz Tyczyński, jestem kuratorem Muzeum Witolda Gombrowicza we Wsoli, które jest miejscem szczególnym, bo to tu właśnie latem 1939 roku odbyła się rozmowa Witolda Gombrowicza z jego starszym bratem Jerzym, która być może przesądziła o wyjeździe pisarza z kraju i jego emigracji. Mówię być może, bo możliwe, że było zupełnie inaczej i rozmowa ta nie miała żadnego wpływu na biografię Gombrowicza, ale po to właśnie są muzea, żeby historię przemieniać w opowieść, w której przetrwają i historia, i jej bohaterowie. A więcej o tym miejscu opowie zapewne Anna Spulna, która poprowadzi dzisiejszą dyskusję.
It's a pleasure for me to start. All of us will have only 10 minutes. But I hope there will be a time during the discussion to clear up some things which will not be obvious. So from the beginning, the story starts in Lithuania because Gombrowicz's family lived there before his grandfather settled in the Kingdom of Poland. So the family felt a little like immigrants in central Poland. And I think Witold himself felt a special connection with Adam Mickiewicz. He was his spiritual opponent and a secret master. In fact, Gombrowicz was born in 1904, still in Russian Empire. But when he was 14, Poland gained independence. But still, it was a country, as Gombrowicz said, country of weakened forms between the East and the West. This is part of kind of testament. So he was born in a manor house in Małoszyce near Sandomierz, and in the beginning he was strictly conditioned by social environment he was living in. I mean gentry, landowners or industrials who lived around him. Some of them, they're quite old-fashioned, in old Sarmatian style. Some were tending to modernity. And Gombrowicz, growing up, was watching and later even provoking some kind of fights between the old-fashioned and modern style people. And he said himself, it was capital entertainment for a youthful sadist. He called himself youthful sadist. Family lived in landed property until 1911. Then they moved to Warsaw, but still they were spending summer months in the country. So this is a place of first contacts with country boys, especially servants. And Gombrowicz wrote, "I hated the drawing room. I secretly adored the pantry, the kitchen, the stables. The gradation became my ideal forever." The landed estate in Bodzechów belonged to Kotkowski family, and they had numerous of mental diseases. That's why they seemed to be eccentric, and Gombrowicz, living with them, was thinking often about this slightly insane aura. Sometimes he used to say, "I'm an artist because of my mother," which seemed also that he was a kind of weirdo. He felt like a weirdo. There are some small places connected with this rural life, like Potoczek, a modest house in the woods belonging to his elder brother, Janusz. It was one of these places where Witold tried to improve his health, weakened by asthma. In these results, I would say, like later, Sopot, Zakopane, Wisła, Rabka, Gombrowicz used to rest and write and also provoke his companions with his behavior. Wsola was his brother's manor house near Radom. Now we have museum here. Gombrowicz was here an often guest. He were here. Here he were rested, played sports, and prepared himself to exams. He also wrote part of his books here. I mean, first short novels and parts of Fertydulkę. Probably here he decided finally to leave Poland and to go to Argentina. And we have one dream of Wsola written by him in Argentina, sent in a letter to Stanisława Cichowska. And in this very special dream, he says about family meeting in Wsola. Nobody is listening to the others. They are talking, telling wartime stories, but they are not listening. And suddenly the philosopher, Blaise Pascal, appears and says, "We live alone and we die alone." And this is for me a perfect description of being a lonely person, of loneliness. And it's also a shortest lecture of existentialism. All these estates were connected with the same kind of relations between nobles and their servants. And Gombrowicz has a special distance to these social roles in pre-war Poland. But the position of Witold as the youngest child and later the artist was special. He was not taken seriously there. He was treated like a weirdo, black sheep even. And by the other hand, he admitted that he was talking nonsense. It was his favorite occupation in the presence of landed gentry. So he was formed by these people, but he has also his own way to be formed. And Warsaw, the capital city, his family bought a luxury apartment at Służewska Street, and after his father's death, they had to change the apartment. They moved to Chocińska Street, where Gombrowicz lived on the same floor with his mother's and sister's apartment, close to them, and he used to take meals and take bath there until he left Poland. So even at his 30s, he was still a tenant of his mother. It's a little funny maybe, because he used to say that he had a difficult life. And I have a quotation: "I didn't have an easy life. I had a difficult life because my life very easiness was difficult for me myself." The real self-reliance and maturity came for Gombrowicz in Argentina. Warsaw was also a place of his school. of his education. He was educated in a light grammar school, Stanisław Kostka's school, at the corner of Traugutta and Krakowskie Przedmieście, and it was a place full of violence and rigor, but also he found some friends there. He passed the final exams. He had only one excellent in Polish. And then he went to study law at University of Warsaw, but he rarely appeared at lectures, only passing his exams. Finally, he received his master's degree, and he was a lawyer, but he never wanted to practice it. He preferred to play tennis, play chess, and of course, to write. In Warsaw, he was living between two worlds. He used to meet with decent people. He used to take part in elegant parties at bourgeois homes. And in the same time, he was visiting distant suburbs of the town, searching for boys and girls. He called them girls of the worst kinds, but I suppose there were also boys there. This is a similar situation to these sexual adventures in Retiro later. So he called himself a person with inner disorder, hidden artificial man, and also an actor. No doubt he had to leave Poland to freely explore his sexuality and even identity. Warsaw was also a center of Polish literary life. Here in Zakopane, he was meeting Witkacy. In Warsaw, he met Bruno Schulz, and then they became friends. He was also invited to Zofia Naukowska Literary Salon. In Warsaw, he turned from an actor into a director of psychological or intellectual games. It happens in literary cafes. He started in Ziemiańska, the center of the artistic society then, and he moved to Zodiac Cafe at Traugutta Street. And as he said, I wanted to be a master of my own home. So he was kind of a king of the table, with a circle of friends around him. With coffee and cigarettes, he was looking for his own style, for his own form. And he got addicted to this kind of life, and he never resigned for this kind of pleasure later. All these places are preserved and transformed in his writings, which are always partly autobiographical. So Warsaw is present at the first short stories. Of course, in Ferdydurke, there is a school and a modern apartment there. There are also land estates like Małoszyce, Bodzechów, or Wsola in Ferdydurke, but also in Possessed. And writing pornography, Gombrowicz comes back to these places, to manor houses near Sandomierz and to parish church in Grocholice, trying to describe this atmosphere of the Second World War in the Polish province. There is also an inn on tavern, similar to his family country house, and it appears at the beginning of the dream which starts the wedding. Of course, we have Zakopane in Tatra Mountains in Kosmos, and diary, Polish memoirs, and chronos are full of flashbacks from Poland. It's obvious for me that Gombrowicz recreates some customs acquired in Poland, in Argentina, Germany, and France, places he lived in. The apartment in Venezuela 615 or Villa Alexandrine are similar to Służewska apartment and Wsola interior. He was always addicted to these cafes, and he always had his table wherever he lived. And I just think he never belonged to one place. He was even not attached to any specific landscape in Poland, as well as to Polish customs, for instance. In my opinion, he was, in a spiritual sense, he was homeless. He was always an emigrant, even before he left Poland. Thank you very much, because my time, I think, is over. And now I'd like to ask Professor Boriński to tell us about Argentina. We can't hear you.
Thank you very much for the talk, and thank you for the invitation. Gombrovich traveled to Argentina in 1939. And I have brought with me as my background a collage of a woman who was born in the same year that Gombrovich was born, in 1904. And she came to Argentina, Grete Stern, as well, in 1935. We shall not specifically talk about Grete Stern, but the voyage from Berlin to Buenos Aires had them intersect in circles that Gombrovich wanted to belong to. And in fact, her destiny in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, paired and compared with Gombrovich's, would bear interesting contrasts that maybe we can talk about later. But Gombrovich, as Anna said very well, was a cafe person. So he arrives in Buenos Aires, and the map of how he arrives in Buenos Aires and where he goes is an emotional map. It's an emotional map because it has to do with his attachment, maybe a little bit arbitrary, maybe just by chance, to certain groups of people who belonged in certain cafes. Now, what are the conditions in which Gombrovich arrives in Buenos Aires? Gombrovich arrives in Buenos Aires for a brief stay, but the war doesn't allow him to return. So there he has an issue, Gombrovich. What is he? Is he an immigrant? He didn't want to be an immigrant. He had a kind of anxiety, and this we draw from his diaries, from his interviews, from his commentaries. He had an anxiety at being considered part of a group. So he's an exile. And we have plenty of documentation about how Gombrovich acted in the cafes that he happened to be in. The cafes were not cafes de barrio, cafes of just neighborhoods. Although he lived in the Bacacay Street, which is a neighborhood, he went more kind of downtown to El Molino, to El Gran Rex, and to another cafe, Fray Mocho. Now, what were these cafes at that time? If you go to Buenos Aires now, those of them that have survived have now very bright lights and glass windows, and they sell pizza. But that was not the case. They were establishments with dark wood where you would be able to have a table and preside. Now, what did he preside on? Gombrovich Virgilio Piñera, who was the head of a committee, the Cuban writer who was also in Buenos Aires at the time, and he was the head of a committee that translated Ferdydurke without really knowing Polish, and it was a wonderful occasion that gathered for rewriting. Great talents, Adolfo Dovieta, Virgilio Piñera, were working there with Gombrovich, who didn't really know Spanish, and they built a book that became absolutely essential to understand Cortázar and all that generation of Argentine writers. So what did one have to do to just get the attention of Gombrovich? Gombrovich by that time had very little money. He lived in pensiones. He had a tattered coat with which he was portrayed in many photographs. At some point, the owner of a pension said that he was eating the food that was left for a dog. He would try to encounter people walking in the street around dinner time so that he would be invited. So that was the person he looked like economically. But what was he in the cafe? In the cafe, Virgilio Pinera says, he had to be the master of the table. So there was a ritual. When you arrived at the cafe and you were a new person, Gombrovich would tell you how he arrived in Buenos Aires. And the way he would tell how he arrived in Buenos Aires obviously would change. But there was always this thing that Gombrovich had. He had arrived in Buenos Aires to discuss and write about the nature of the Argentine soul. So he believed himself to be an individual and to be an eccentric. But he believed that there was a kind of general collective property in Argentina that he understood better than others. That, of course, was part of an anxiety that many people had at that point, because Buenos Aires was a city of immigrants and a city of exiles. And mixed up with all of that was Gombrovich, who had instructed the younger persons who were around him, Dipi de Paola, Gomez, and others, which I have, Alejandro Rusovich, whom I met, Miguel Grimberg, Nestor Tirri. They had to call him Conde, Count. So he had a kind, and people in Argentina thought it was all a story. It was all fiction, because every immigrant in Argentina thought the Jews who had arrived from Russia would tell you that they had the biggest car in Kiev or somewhere like that. The Poles who had been able to survive would also talk about everything that they had. And some people said the truth and some people didn't. So Gombrovich was regarded as just one of those many people in Argentina who had a story. So people would call him Count with a sense of irony. I shall not go on for too long more, but I shall tell you about the dinner. Gombrovich had a big anxiety. He did not understand why it was that Argentines, porteños, people from Buenos Aires, didn't get that the one who really represented what Buenos Aires culture and Argentine culture were about was him and not Borges. So he thought that it was a huge mistake for Argentines to feel that Borges was a great writer. But he really wanted to be part of that group, the group Sur, that was presided by Victoria Ocampo, Silvina Ocampo, Bioy Casares, Borges. So the dinner takes place. Bioy Casares and Silvina Ocampo had a home where they organized dinners. So they organized a dinner and they put Gombrovich next to Borges. They don't talk the whole night. And there is Rita Gombrovich. I am sorry she's not here, but she gathered documents and we know about that dinner thanks to Rita and thanks to my conversations with Bioy Casares. So the situation was very simple. Bioy told me, well, we really had nothing to do with Gombrovich. He was not like us. He was very different. Gombrovich, and with this, I think I will more or less be wrapping it up. Gombrovich, though, did find his niche. He found his niche in La Fragata. He found his niche in El Gran Rex, in El Fray Mocho, with all of those other people who were individuals, who felt kind of eccentric, but he did something that was excruciatingly cruel for some. He seduced them. So he had built around him a kind of cult that we can see in a film that is available, made by his disciples, called Gombrovich Seduction, Gombrovich and his disciples. And in Argentina, that was from the word go, absolutely choked with psychoanalysis. It is a very, very interesting study in speaking with an accent, being parodied, not belonging, having punishing humor seen from the state, understanding love as the cruelty of not being wanted. That was Gombrovich's sense of belonging. When Gombrovich leaves Argentina, I think that he had become that absolutely perfect tango character that you see in so many lyrics. A man sitting alone at a cafe table, looking at the world go by and seeing how everybody lies, including himself. So these are my 10 minutes, and I look forward to your comments. I can't hear you. You are muted. You are muted.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, Professor Boriński. I think we will get some other perspective now, because it will be also a story of Gombrowicz places in Argentina, but told from Poland. So we can compare these perspectives now. And now I'd like to invite Professor Kobyłecka-Piwońska to tell us her point of view. Show us her point of view.
Thank you very much, Anya. Well, first of all, I would like to also thank the organizers, the Institute Pilecki, and also Museum Gombrowicz in Wsola for having me here today. And also I'd like to thank all of you Gombrowicz fans who decided to devote this Sunday afternoon to hear us and to talk later about Gombrowicz and places. Well, Alicia has already spoken about Buenos Aires and about friendships that Gombrowicz made there, and in general about his life in Buenos Aires. I've chosen to speak about the places and the Buenos Aires, Argentina, in two Gombrowicz texts. One would be Kronos, and the other one will be Argentinian peregrinations. So less about his life experience and more about what he wrote and how he interacted with Argentina in his writings. So first, very briefly, Kronos. It is normally, as you know, certainly it's a so-called secret diary. It is not secret anymore since it was published a few years ago. And it is normally read as a book about time, a kind of arduous reconstruction of the past. But I think it can be also read as a book about space and as a kind of a personal map that Gombrowicz draws for himself. In the first years of his stay in Argentina, 1940s, he basically in Kronos, he precisely draws this kind of personal itinerary through Buenos Aires. The pages devoted to these first years are full of street names, corner names, square names, addresses of hostels where he stayed. And very clearly, his growing into Argentina, as he puts it in Kronos, is conditioned by his discovery of the city. of what we would call nowadays urban fabric. So not only the buildings, but also economic structures, social, cultural structures of Buenos Aires. And once the place is tamed, once he feels at home in Buenos Aires, his strategy changes a bit, and he starts to use the city as a kind of special code to tag his lovers. Maybe you remember that sometimes he even doesn't bother to know the name of the lover, but he always puts the place when he met him or her. So you can easily find the expression like Chico Chica Plaza Once would be girl or a boy, Once Square, and so on. In Kronos, Gombrovich turns out to be a kind of erotic flaneur, but he uses these spatial references not only to describe his erotic adventures, but also just to describe quite normal events in his life. For example, when he once has an argument with his cousin Gustav, he puts in Kronos, argument with Gustav at July 9 Avenue. So this special reference, I insist, is very important for him. Well, now the other book I would like to speak about is Argentinian Peregrination. As you may know, this book is composed rather by 26 chronicles that Gombrovich wrote for the Polish wing of Free Europe Radio. As you certainly know as well, travel writings is not what we could call spécialité de la maison in Gombrovich cuisine. His signature dish would be rather the self, so the autobiographical writings. This is what always demanded his attention. Gombrovich actually didn't even like to travel. As he writes in Argentinian Peregrination, I quote, "I love dipping into the virgin jungle and travel across the savage deserts, but I don't like when it's wet, cold, scorching hot, it shakes terribly, and on the top of that, I have problems with brushing my teeth." So Gombrovich definitely was not a tourist, was not a globetrotter. Maybe he was a migrant, but for a writer who despised making journeys, he actually traveled quite a lot, even if in part these travels were forced by his health problem. As you know, he suffered from asthma. Well, coming back to Argentinian peregrinations, the way in which Gombrovich spoke about this book, he always spoke about it in a kind of denigrating way, as a book designed for a reader who is not really very sophisticated nor subtle, as a book written only for money. So this way in which he spoke about it actually goes hand in hand with his feelings about traveling. He described it as something that doesn't really suit to a serious writer. However, well, he says quite openly that he decided to write about travel just to entertain the reader, to charm the reader, to seduce the reader, so to do just exactly the contrary of what he does in his high literature. Because in diary, as you remember, what he does is to tease the reader, to mock him or her. But if you expect to read in the Argentinian peregrination a kind of, to find in the Argentinian peregrination a kind of tourist guide to Argentina, you will be disappointed. Well, because the reader of this book quickly realizes that the real subject of the book is once more not at all the traveler, but the self. The way in which the self perceives the reality, the way in which he meditates about it. the self here in this book is a domesticated self, not this self that we know from the diary. So the misbehaving self, the rebellious self, the nonconformist self. Here, the self is already domesticated. But actually, what is not domesticated at all is the nature. He transfers all these qualities that normally characterize the self in his prose to the nature. So it first seems to be, the nature so well known, so well tamed, so domesticated, but suddenly the nature becomes strange, weird, disturbing, even I would say demonic. The subject doesn't really know how to refer to it. He can't find words because the language itself fails to describe Iguazu waterfalls or the Andes mountains. The nature becomes sinister and threatening. But of course, it's only the literary creation, the way in which Gombrowicz interacted in this book with the Argentinian space. My time is up, so thank you for your attention. Maybe we will have an occasion to talk about it later. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you very much. And I think we have and will have questions about all these parts of our meeting. But now we have time to listen Olaf Kühl. He will tell us probably about Berlin, but maybe about something else, about Germany at all. So now we'll listen to Olaf Kühl and his perspective of Gombrowicz places in Germany.
Thank you. There's written so much about Gombrowicz in Berlin that I have the feeling I am repeating myself and other authors in everything I say about Gombrowicz in Berlin. So I try to talk more about mental topoi than about real places in Berlin. And I will start with the constatation that for Gombrowicz, Berlin West, we had to name, the East wanted to be West Berlin and a special entity, political entity, not connected with Germany. So they said West Berlin, we in the West said Berlin West. For Gombrowicz, Berlin West was not the place of his dreams. He accepted the invitation of the Ford Foundation in 1963, 1964, because it was well remunerated by the standards of the time, and because it gave him a good reason to leave Argentina and return to Europe after 23 years in Argentina. In the intimate diary Kronos and in his letters to his Parisian publisher Jerzy Giedroyć, he racks his brains whether the $1,250 monthly really meant US dollars and how much tax he would have to pay on it. In Kronos, he always pays much attention to financial matters, how much money he has on his konto, how much did he earn, and so on. So in my brief remarks, I will talk more about mental topper than real places. Although I'm sitting here in a flat exactly 5 minutes away from his apartment on Bartning Allee. I'm living in Hansa Viertel. According to some criteria, the stay in Berlin was a failure. First, his social life in Berlin remained rudimentary. His attempts to establish something like a literary cafe, his great addiction, as Alicia told us, in Berlin failed. He tried to do it in Café Zunz am Kurfürstendamm. Contacts with other writers such as Uwe Jonsson or Günter Grass, very known writers, remained superficial. Only with Ingeborg Bachmann, who spoke French, did a friendship develop. Gombrowicz was not always satisfied with the DAADs. This is German Academic Exchange Service apartments. Now a commemorative plaque will soon be affixed to the house at Barning-Allee 11 in the Hansa-Viertel where he lived several months. More numerous than his intellectual contacts were his erotic contacts with young Germans. Gombrowicz mentions at least 4 of them in Kronos. And I think for me, it's a very interesting task for an investigative biographer to establish the identity of at least one of them. This has not been done. They are all likely to be in their mid or late 70s today, if they are still alive. The geographical proximity to his homeland did not move him to the final step to Poland. He left it at the Smells in Berlin Tiergarten. The communist propaganda machinery systematically attacked him for staying in the West and more in Germany. Thanks to the research of the biographer Klementyna Suchanov, it is known now that Barbara Witek-Świnarska, she wanted to be called Swinarska, not Świnarska, author of a slanderous interview article reported to the Polish Secret Service, and that even the cultural department of the Central Committee was involved in observing Gombrowicz. Thus, you can say that Gombrowicz in Berlin found himself at the epicenter of what today we would call an information war. The Western side, the Ford Foundation, used its soft power more subtle and gave its fellows a free hand, but it was financed by CIA funds. And we know that Gombrowicz always took great pleasure in duels. Just think of the duel of the professors of analytics and synthetics and Philidorke, Philidor's child within, as it's called in English. He would have his fun with this East-West duel as well, if only he had seen it through to its full size. But in any case, his illness robbed him of his last strength in Berlin. If Gombrowicz Berlin year was nevertheless tremendously fruitful, despite these adversities, it is thanks to his never flagging belligerence and intellectual vigor. Above all, it was the confrontation with this city and with the Germans. The relevant part of the diary, the Berlin Notes, Berliner Notizen, inspires to this day. Here, Gombrowicz's courage to think things anew is proven. The universality of his thinking completely without the supporting corset of a friend-foe thinking, without taking refuge in the comfortable victim role. Gombrowicz fights an open battle with what he perceives as a German. His novel Cosmos, which he is working on completing in Berlin, has to do with the creation, with the construction of reality. And this is precisely where he sees the great strength of the Germans. They go blindly ahead. In the first line, they create reality, and I quote from the diary, I quote the translation of Lillian Valley in the US edition published by Yale University Press. Gombrovich writes, "This is by no means a secondary nation, but one in the forefront and thus actually making its way blindly, not imitating, but creating, innocent, because it is entering virgin territory." Without denying German crimes, Gombrowicz comes to a provocative and seemingly paradoxical, but basically typical Gombrowichian conclusion. He says, I had to take on all those crimes, just as if I had committed them. I became Hitler, and I had to accept Hitler's presence in every dying Pole, and the fact that he still existed in every living Pole. The eternal revulsion to crime simply extends its life. One must swallow it. One must eat it. Nations of the world, and I think this is a crypto citat of Ernst Reuter, the governing mayor of Berlin, who said in his famous historic speech before the ruins of the Reichstag, nations of the world look to the city. And Gombrowicz says, nations of the world, do you still believe that Hitler was only a German? Compared to today's German-Polish dialogue, which has long since shrunk back to dwarf size, and compared to what other Polish authors have produced about Deutschland or Germany, Gombrowicz's diagnoses do not contribute to hardening mutual stereotypes. Rather, they open up the debate and are just as relevant and lively today as they were then. And I personally take it as a great compliment to Berlin when Gombrowicz states at the end that the city and he, the Germans' creation of reality, and that in his novel Cosmos, soon become inseparable. Quote, how much of what is occurring to me stems from my illness? How much from Berlin's illness? This city is in some ways so like me that I no longer know where I end and it begins. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. It wasn't an easy period in Gombrowicz's life, but the harder it was, the more interesting, I think. And I hope we will talk about it. Now it's my pleasure to ask Katarzyna Kula from Vence, from Gombrowicz Museum in Vence, to say about Gombrowicz connections with Paris.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for everyone who listens and for everyone who speaks. Well, I wanted to tell you about a few words about not only about Paris, but also about his trip to the south, but only the trip, because I know that Małgorzata is going to speak about the other part, and a little bit about the orbit of Paris, like Maison Lafitte, the house of Cultura, the famous network, literary network, Polish network in France, and a little bit about Royaumont, the abbey, the scientific center where he spent some months. So I would like to speak to you a little bit about Gombrowicz, who is eccentric, but not only in the sense of being, I don't know, unconventional, unusual, strange, but also in the sense of being outlying, of being out of the center, because as you know well, or as you're gonna know. Gombrowicz is not feeling well in the great centers of the world, in the great cultural centers like Paris. Even if I will quote a little bit, even if he is already deep down so closely connected with the continent, he's still feeling a country bumpkin, an unmannered student, a provincial figure, and he prefers that any place, he prefers that the places do not intimidate him, do not impose the great form to him. So that is why he didn't like Paris, and he preferred the south of France, who showed him the other face of the French culture, frank, simple, plenty of simple beauty of the life. And on the other hand, we know that Argentina was then a young country, a young in every sense, a young in political sense, in human sense, and in cultural sense. So that's maybe one of the reasons why Gombrowicz is known also as an Argentinian writer. But I think that Eva could speak us a lot more about this. So I would like to speak a few words about each of these places because apparently these places which are not in the center, but in the orbit of the culture of the great words, each of these places turned out to be the life-changing places for Gombrovich. And why? Well, I will try to tell you. So when we are speaking about Paris, we have to say that we can't speak about one Paris, one Gombrowicz's Paris, because there was at least three stays in Paris of Gombrovich. So in the first time when he was in Paris, it was in 1928, and in Chronos, he devotes only a few lines to his about his first stay. But these are memories drawn from the head 20 years later. He doesn't have many memories from the stay. He was young, immature, suffering from love disappointment with Krystyna Konarska from Bartodzieje. He was a lazy student, unwilling to work and wanting to escape the military service. So he was terribly afraid of the army. So he accepted the fact that his family wanted to send him to continue his studies in Paris. But we have to say that this young bourgeois, with his father's money, he will live not in the Quartier Latin, but in the prestigious 16th arrondissement in the Hotel de Sévigné, between the Triumphal Arch, l'Arc de Triomphe, and the Eiffel Tower. So he is not interested in his studies, not interested in Paris at all. He prefers to wander the streets of Paris, meet young anarchists and philosophers, and observe the surrealists and learn the philosophy. But in the same time, we have to say that Paris was really a vibrant city, not only bourgeois, but also full of great personalities like André Gide, Ernest Hemingway, Scott Fitzgerald, Miller, but also people who had the same age that Gombrovich, Samuel Beckett, George Orwell, Salvador Dali. So we can compare that Witold, he was still in nature. He didn't become, he was becoming, he wanted to become. So in the matter of fact, the entire state in Paris, Witold, who was nobody and who wanted to become somebody, who was disturbed by Paris and Parisians. So all the stay was a struggle for independence, the struggle with the form. But we have to say that he will become a few days later, but I will talk about it a little bit later. So for the second time, he's in the Paris in 1963 and 1964. We have to say about 2 stays, but I will talk together about all this Paris 35 years later. Paris, who should be, that's the quote of one of the countess, the great countess, Paris enters the era of Gombrovich. So Gombrovich writes, I hang around Paris, then as an insignificant student when he was young in 1928. Today, Witold Gombrowicz is coming to Paris, and so we have receptions, interviews, conversations, consultations. He will go to all the restaurants and cafes of writers, the writers one, Café de la Paix, de Magot. He will be invited to big parties. He will be treated, and sometimes he will be acting like a real count. But he can also be a great joker. You never know. So it was quite disturbing for the people from Cultura. But in 1963, he becomes also the pilgrim to the past. In Paris, he will find his own paths from the past. So the 16th district, the Champs-Élysées, his Hotel de Sévigné, even Notre Dame and le Musée du Louvre, that he criticized a lot. But he will say that Paris became really more noisy, full of cars, Louvre roaring with cars, but also a lot more political, a lot more, much more Marxist, much more bourgeois. He's praised in Europe, but he has little money. He really wants to be known and praised, and he have to have some kind of confrontation with the people that normally he knows since years, like Jerzy Giedroyć and all the circle of Kultura, and even Konstanty Kot-Mieleński. And in the matter of fact, he's lost in Paris. This is completely different battle. The positions changed, but it is still the same war. And wanting to take some kind of revenge for his young self, he decides to be difficult for Paris, to not enter its games. He criticized and mocked a lot Paris and Parisians, who unfortunately lack a sense of humor. So what can we say that what did Paris give to Gombrowicz, the surrealists? He taught him to fight the form, still the same thing, and to not please. And when we are speaking about Paris, we have to say a few words about the orbit. So the Maison Lafitte, so the House of Cultura, and the Cultural Center of Royaumont. So it's not chronological what I want to do, but I would like just to say a few words about places that were important in Gombrowicz's life, the literary and the personal one. So Cultura, we have to say that the correspondence with Giedroyć started in 1950. And the matter of fact, thanks to Giedroyć and the circle of Kultura, Gombrowicz was promoted, started to be promoted in Polish, and then not immediately in French. So in the 1963, this is the first time that he have to know in the real life Jerzy Giedroyć and Konstanty Jeleński, and it's the first time that he goes to the Maison, or to the House of Cultura, which is at Maison Lafitte, but really it's, in the matter of fact, it's Mesnil-le-Roi. Sorry. So Gombrowicz says, "What a lovely house, pure pleasure to behold." And Giedroyć, it's really conventional, the speakers, the talks with Giedroyć, and Giedroyć practically reply, "Pretty spacious and comfortable, good working conditions." But we have to say that Kultura, it is especially the crew of Kultura. So Jerzy Giedroyć, the chief redactor, the redactor, with his collaborators, Józef Czapski, Kot Jeleński, the couple of Hertz, and many others who created this unique network which permitted to publish Polish writers banned by the communist Poland, and Kultura was also hosting this band, this prohibited writers. But what we have to say that what gave Kultura to Gombrowicz? So it helped him a lot to become the famous writer, yes, in Polish and indirectly in French. And just a few words about Royaumont. So it was the abbey from the 13th century. And it was meant to promote the culture and the science. It was powerful Gothic, four-sided walls, galleries, arches, rosettes, columns, and a peaceful park. So it was meant to help to improve the Gombrowicz's health. But in the matter of fact, this place of international congress of the great encounters with science, with culture, it suffocates Gombrowicz with solitude, with many French intellectuals who were Marxist and who didn't understand the suffering of Polish, of all the Eastern, of the writers and intellectuals from Eastern Europe. But we have to say that it was really important because Royaumont permitted to Gombrowicz to have another opportunity to fight with the form and to fight with the French intellectuals, but also it gave him Rita, who is now the future of, at least of the promotion of his work. So voila, the Gombrowicz, the eccentric. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Katarzyna. Thanks a lot. We have two more voices from France. one is a surprise, but first we can hear something from Małgorzata Smorgon-Goldberg from Paris, from Sorbonne. So now it's your time, Małgorzata.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this initiative. Very interesting. Thank you very much for your very interesting talks. And bravo, Katarzyna, because it was not easy to embrace of this all these French places which are very important for the end of for the last part of Gombrowicz's life. Since I would start like Olaf started, since there was a lot of text written on Vence and the Gombrowicz's relation to Vence, I would like maybe to reflect with you on what we could name the subjective geography, the subjective mapping of Gombrowicz. Since I'm speaking at the end of our meeting, I would like to reflect with you on this very particular way that Gombrowicz had to relate to a territory. The importance of subjective geography, topography. Witold Gombrowicz is certainly one of these writers for whom the territory of meaning, of its own meaning, is correlated to places. Not really to countries, but to atmospheres, to places. In Poland, it will be Małoszyce, Wsola, Warszawa, Zakopane, and he would replay after in his life all these places in a different staging. Tandil will be a sort of Zakopane, Buenos Aires will be a sort of Warsaw and Zakopane mixed together. Santiago will be a sort of Zakopane, a place for erotical experiences. And again, in France, Paris is discovered in 1928 when first he comes to France, as Kasia said, as a place that he has to fight. He has to his affirmation as a self goes by this duel. Olaf spoke also of this pattern of duel, which is very important in Gombrowicz's strategy. He has to impose his own perception of the place, and it's very often by fighting against the place. So this is how the places are important for this exilé, for this individuality, which for a very long time of his life didn't have really a place, a stable place. The 23 years in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, he was all the time moving from one place to another. And Vence will be the only place where he spent 5 years and where he had a kind of normal life. He said, we all know this quotation, that it was sad because it was too late for him and he was too sick already. So if if we take what are the conditions in which Gombrowicz arrives in Vence. He arrives in Vence in a deep depression. He's very seriously ill. 1 year in Berlin, Olaf spoke about it. It was a tragical year. It was this returning to Europe that he hoped to be related maybe to a visit to Poland, and he understood quite quickly that it will be impossible, and it was tragically near by smells, by perfumes, by colors, and tragically impossible to reach. So he had this health accident. He spent long months in hospital. So when he arrives in France in May 64, May 17th, tomorrow, he's really in a very tragical state. There is a letter, I don't have the time to quote it, really by Zygmunt Herz, who was a soul of Cultura, and this very warm person who was connecting everyone to everyone, and who was trying to become a friend of all these big writers who were passing by Maison Alfort. And he writes a letter to Miłosz. The letter is dated from May 21, and he says that there is Gombrowicz with us at the moment. He's doing very badly. He has lost 15 kilos. He has shortness of breath, persistent difficulty of breathing, blocked bronchi, and completely weakened heart. So, Hart is saying, you know that I didn't really love him, but I'm trying to save him because his condition is so tragically bad. So this is the condition of Gombrowicz when he arrives to Paris. He very quickly understands that Giedroyć will not propose him to stay at Cultura, so he has to find a place. He's badly seeking for a place to stay. Kozieleński, by a miracle, find this possibility to stay at Royaumont, but this is temporary. He knows that he has to invent a possibility of a place which will be warm, but not too warm. Kasia spoke about his this great event which the encounter with Rita will be in his life, and the fact that Rita will search for a place for him to stay, and he's dreaming of South. Why is he dreaming of South? He's dreaming of South because he discovered the South in 1928. His journey he escaped this Paris, which he hated, and went for 6 months to Pyrénées, n'est-ce pas? He stayed at Vernay-les-Bains, Le Boulou, Port-Vendre, Banyuls, and everything there was for him a discovery of something which will mark his life forever. So this discovery of principle of South, he's speaking in Testament in his conversations with Dominique de Roux about this discovery of the South, and he's saying that it's not a precise South, but it's a principle of South, which for him means life, joy, health, love, sensuality, and of course this discovery of the South is related to his experience of the North and of the Northern landscape. And as always in Gombrowicz's oppositions, the South can be understood without this obsession, this shadow of the northern landscape. Few years before he discovered the South, he had to stay for a few weeks in a country house. He speaks about it in Wspomnienia Polskie, and he was suspected of tuberculosis, and his mother sent him to the countryside, and he stayed at in this manoir. It was not Wsola, which was the nice part of his background of this Polish manners. This one was from his mother's side dominated by madness, by sadness, by solitude, and this countryside marked him very much. Dwór był w lasach, które to lasy przecinała smuga 5 stawów. Tak spędziłem kilka nocy, jakby na progu jakiegoś okropnego wtajemniczenia. I can't translate it into English, but he's speaking about the mystery of this northern landscape. So these two landscapes are very important for his construction of his final ultimated place. For this Vence, which was the last retreat, which was a place that he completely invented. He badly needed a place which will be in between the South, which became a myth in his personal mythology, and the Central Europe, Poland, which was a scene which he always held in his mind. So what is fascinating about Vence, that it became a place which was completely reinvented by Gombrowicz. It was a screen where he projected his obsession of places that he loved during his life. It's like a conclusion. It's a sad that Rita can't be there and tell us about his perception of Vence, but it was something. Villa Alexandrine was something which reminded him Wsola, the place where these two cafés were La Régence et Le Select. It was something which reminded him Zakopane, Warsaw with his cafe, the cafe from Buenos Aires, La Fragata, Rex, which were important for him, and it was some kind of it was not a real place. It was a place which was completely a replica of what was important, like a miniature of what was important for him during all his life. This is quite fascinating. The landscape from time to time remind him Tatra and the Baltic Sea, and from time to time Santiago, Buenos Aires, and his travels in Argentina, and all that. It was something which he reinvented completely. And Vence was far from this wild beauty of his ideal south. We hardly have precise descriptions of Vence in his journal. It's completely abstrait. Te sosny, te drogi, te plaże, something completely like almost an abstract painting, and because for Gombrowicz it was not really important what you can see. Włodek Bolecki once wrote an essay, Did Gombrowicz had eyes? Czy Gombrowicz miał oczy? About the absence of descriptions, of realistic descriptions in Gombrowicz's work. So Vence became a screen when he projected all the important atmospheres and landscapes which constructed his own relation to space. That's more or less, I wrote an article about that, so I can send it to you if you are interested, because it was quite complicated to summarize that in 10 minutes. So I will be happy to discuss it during our exchange, our discussion at the end.
Thank you very, very much. We are waiting for this discussion, but I said we have a special surprise, and here with us in Vence is Evelyn Temman, and we have a special gift from her. I mean, we have a film with a few words from Vence, and we will show this film now straight from Institute Espace Muséal Villa Alexandrine, Institute European, from windy but also sunny Vence. This film now.
Il y a plus d'un an que je réside à Vence, à une vingtaine de kilomètres de Nice, sur les pentes des Alpes-Maritimes. Un endroit chic, qui abonde de résidences élégamment masquées, de palmiers, de murs de rosiers, de forêts de mimosas. De ma fenêtre, je vois parfois, sur la petite place du Grand Jardin, des Rolls, des Jaguars et surprise, de nouveaux locataires. Ici, dans ce cimetière de Vence, est la fin du commencement de notre belle aventure. Les visiteurs ne manquent pas. Vence est bien un salon européen. Les étrangers ne cessent d'affluer d'Amérique, de Suède. Pour les fêtes, on voit pulluler les rois, les financiers, les maharajas, les ministres, les animaux, les vedettes de cinéma. Mais il ne se passe rien. En es-tu certain, Gombro? J'ai souvenir d'une discussion intime où, en 2002, tu m'as fait part de ton inquiétude quant à ton œuvre littéraire à Vence. Et je t'ai fait une promesse. Un jour, je ferai quelque chose pour toi. Avec des collaborateurs, des partenaires, nous avons réussi à créer un espace muséal Witold Gombrowicz dans la Villa Alexandrine, grâce également à Rita Gombrowicz. Aujourd'hui, Witold, tu vis dans un monde gombrowiczien.
I would like to ask about something I was thinking about while you've been talking. I can hear all the time about Gombrowicz struggling, fighting, being ill, being sad. What about these places which were pure fun, pure rest, pure joy? Would you name some places like that? How do you think?
If I may start, I think that it had to do with age. I think that when Gombrovich was in Argentina, he was obviously younger than he was in France. So I have no doubt, even looking at the film, at the seduction film, that there was a great deal of joy in this. Also, we know about the parties in which Gombrovich would go up on the table and drop his pants. I mean, that whole situation that he had of proving with his body and with his uncomfortable humor, uncomfortable interventions were certainly fun for him. The question is, how do you define that kind of humor? No, for him, he always needed, it seems, somebody, either as a public or as a partner or something, who would be the aggrieved object of a punishing humor. But what I see in Argentina is a younger person, very intense, participating with what was intensity, and that for some of us, intensity and joy kind of go together.
Katarzyna?
Perfect. I missed the part concerning the South, but I would like to invite you also to read the article that Anna Spulna wrote. I think it will be published in Archivum Emigracji, donc les archives de l'émigration, but I don't know when, but it's really great about the south of the France. But by the matter of fact, I wanted to tell you about his way to the south, from the north to the south. So from Paris, that he hated, to the north, and in the train, in the matter of fact, the train was the link between the north and the south. And in the train, he decided to become a writer. It was the most important fact. So he discovered his destiny. But then in the south, I think he was really happy. He was joyful. He was joyful. He felt the liberty, the freedom. He felt the happiness. He was not oppressed by the form. The young, I wanted to say they are communists, no, but the young people from the south, they played, they made little trips around. They drank a lot. They ate fruits. So I think that was the moment when he discovered the south. And he discovered the south for the future. Many years later, he will say, in the south, what Małgosia spoke about it, he discovered, maybe it was some kind of premonition of Argentina, but I think that he was really, really happy in the south of France in 1928.
If I may add, absolutely, I absolutely agree. He was also happy when he arrived to Argentina, as Alicia said. The first years, the Retiro years, when he didn't write, starting from 39 to, let's say, 48, because he became to go back to literature at this time. He was just experiencing life, free homosexuality, and freedom from this fact of being son of Gombrovich family, and this private life, this life full of joy, but full of sadness also, because he was very poor, as Alicia recalled. He was going to funerals in order to be invited after and to eat a good meal. So it's always mixed. He's happy and unhappy. The same thing, he was happy in Tandil when he discovered this friendship with his young friends from Tandil, but he was also very ill in Tandil and very depressed. So it's like in Proust, Gombrovich is idealizing places when he has to leave them. He became in love with Argentina in the way back to Europe. He's writing Argentine, Argentine, oh Argentine, I love you, when he's leaving Argentina. And so it's always mixed, but he was definitely happy in the south when this first discovery in 1928 of the south, and after this Argentina, which was interpreted by him as something that this discovery from 1928 announced, and this way he had to reconfigure his life like something completely necessary, that Argentina was already projected in his faith when he discovered South in 28. So definitely, yes, I will say that he was happy and unhappy also, South.
I do agree, Małgorzata, absolutely. And I think Eva would like to say something. She wanted to say something, yeah?
Well, yeah. I wanted to speak also about the 1940s in Buenos Aires. So the Retiro years, but Małgorzata has already mentioned it. Well, in general, I would say that maybe we can't say a lot about his happiness because the only thing we have access to are his writings. When obviously he does not transfer his real life, it's always a kind of construction. And I would say that maybe in general, happiness is not for him maybe a very literary subject, because what is maybe interesting, and I would like to stress it, this aspect is that I think that he is really happy, if I can use this word, in the time in the 1940s when he doesn't write. In some way, literature and happiness exclude each other in his writings. Well, not much more to say. Thank you.
Can I say something?
Yes, of course.
Okay, I agree with Eva that perhaps it is not a literary subject because he was exploring other things. But I think that one of the matters that he explores in the literature is delving into ridicule and the romp, like we see in Transatlantic, the kind of romp. But about happiness tout court, as I started to think about, that's an excellent question. I hadn't thought about it. I recall a moment in Buenos Aires when I gave a lecture about Gombrovich, and out of the public came this man I had never met before, and he was Alejandro Rusovich, who I think Eva met in the Sun, who was also going around. So Alejandro Rusovich, in a party that they threw after the lecture, said to me, I am Alejandro Rusovich. And I took a moment to know who he was because I didn't have in mind the whole group of men who had, as young people, lived with him. So he said, the most intense moments of my life I've lived with Witoldo. So it must have been happy. I mean, they suffered a lot, as we learn from the movie, as we learn from their testimonies. But I think that there was the happiness of knowledge, of having gotten to somewhere about power, at rehearsing those scenarios that were very cruel, but that they had dared go over some kind of border, over the line somehow. I heard it from other people too of that generation, Mariano Betelú, who was also a drawer, he was an artist. So that must have been, a relative youth, all of those feelings being there, silence being available, like Eva suggested,
Olaf Kuhl.
I would say it's ever stressed. It's very difficult to judge about somebody's happiness from outside.
Yes.
I know Gombrowicz only by his writing. And if you read Kronos and imagine his life by Kronos, you have a completely depressing life. I never read a book so depressing like Kronos. And this cannot be the whole truth. I imagine he was very happy in the first years in Argentina. He was happy with Alexandra Rusovich. He suffered very much when they, let's say, divorced. He was happy with Rita in his last years. So I think even more his happiness depended on people he was with than with places.
Yeah. If I may say just one word, what Alicia said about happiness of being a Socrates of Buenos Aires. François Bondy said that Gombrowicz was a Socrates of Café of Buenos Aires. And this way of modeling young people gave him, I think, a real happiness.
Yes.
So Alexandra Rusovich, it was special because they lived together. But when he proposed to Alexandra Rusovich to live with him, it was because he was desperately alone. So it was also, it's always mixed with solitude and tragical perception of existence. But definitely he was very happy to have these young friends and the group of Tandil, Betelou, etc. He stayed in touch with them until the end and paid their studies, and it was a real, I think, a real source of happiness for him.
There is this known quotation of Ingeborg Bachmann. She wrote that this man is the most lonely man on the world, when she learned to know him in Berlin.
Thank you. To close this part of discussion, I would like to I would like to say I remember so many pictures, so many photographs with Happy Gombrowicz, with friends, with boys, with Rita, with Kotieleński. He's smiling, he's feeling something, some kind of freedom in contact with them. So I think sometimes we should look at the pictures. And I would like you to ask, because this was my question, and I'm happy we've been talking about it, but maybe you would like to ask to each other. Because we have also questions from our audience. So now it's our turn, but then we will go to the Q&A. It seems like we can go to Q&A. So, well, Gombrowicz locations have been discussed from very different perspectives, and now we will try to answer these questions. And I have a question from Kacper Nowacki. It's in English. It's a double question to Professor Boriński, so I will read it.
Yes.
And I think these are two questions. Thank you, Alicja Boriński, for this very interesting presentation. What is the name of the woman on the picture behind you? Is the first question.
Very good. I did not plan this question. I'm glad you asked. This is a woman, Grete Stern, who was born in Germany the same year as Gombrowicz was born. And she also left for Buenos Aires. She left earlier for Buenos Aires. She's an artist associated with the Bauhaus. She was a student of Peter Hans. She was one of the first fashion photographers, and she came to Buenos Aires. And what you see behind me is her collage. She was commissioned by a female magazine called Idilio to do collages of dreams. The female readers would, instead of asking questions of the heart, would do their dreams. So there was a group of two psychoanalysts. The column was called Psychoanalysis Will Help You. El psicoanálisis te ayudará. So they would get the letters, give her a little text, and they would give a title to her collage. The one condition was that the protagonist of the collage had to be a woman who was dressed in fashions of the time, so that the women reading could benefit from the psychoanalysis, but also would copy the patterns and wear the clothes. Grete Stern, from my point of view, was wonderful, and she was admitted in the circle of Borges. She is the author of some of the best photographs of Borges. She was the one that they did in 1935, the first show of avant-garde photography around. So in a way, being a contemporary of Gombrovich, she achieved what Gombrovich would have liked, because he would have liked to be at the center of this, but she was a very unassuming. I've researched Greta Stern a lot, and I've written about her, and I am always in the process of renewing this. Very interesting situation of two Europeans arriving in Buenos Aires and staying estranged. So that's what I like about it. So thank you very much for the question. I was afraid nobody would ask.
I thank in the name of Kacper Nowacki, and we have another question. What do you think about the place of Gombrowicz's writings in comparative literature studies?
Very important. I think that Gombrovich is very important. This is a book of mine, One-Way Tickets, Writers and the Culture of Exile, where I have a big chapter on Gombrovich. I think that Gombrovich is very important for many, many reasons. I mean, increasingly, we know that translation is at the heart of the languages we speak. And understanding Gombrovich's place in Argentina and elsewhere, Gombrovich's work becomes an incentive, a motor, an inspiration for Cortázar before Gombrovich becomes actually that very well known in Poland. But it's not because he sounds Argentine, it's not because he sounds Spanish, it's because he doesn't. So that poetic of distancing, of foreignizing, of making us all know that to some extent we are nomadic, we are scattered. You read it in Gombrovich with that, you have so much to study, to learn about that kind of humor and so on. I think that it is very important. He becomes very important in my view when you do the relationship between Sartre and Kundera in France, when you start thinking of this counterpoint that Gombrovich has between local national histories and the history of literature. So yes, I think he's very important. I think that there are aspects of his life that are very anguishing, but they do not reflect in the writings. Luckily, we have the diaries, and the diaries do give us a kind of minute by minute appreciation that makes it also very important for a comparative literature. I think that Gombrowich's whole idea about mistrusting national values, as he said, los valores nacionales, and going for something else is still one of the things that we are discussing now. So yeah, I am a great fan, but I also think that there is just so much food for thought for everybody that even if one doesn't like it, even if one is repelled by the many techniques of distancing of Gombrovich, I happen to like that. Even if one is repelled by the stilted nature of some of his representations, there is just so much to learn there that I think that he is important.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. I will read another question. Mm-hmm. It's about a hat, but it's a hat of Evelyn. Where can you get such a wonderful hat? Evelyn!
La question du public.
Coup de chapeau pour le chapeau.
Portons le chapeau.
Et voilà. Voilà. Maintenant, il faut chanter.
The serious questions are finished, as I see, but we have also nice words from Hanna Radziejewska. Thank you very much for the very interesting discussion. And this is what I would like to say. Thank you for your presence, for your excellent stories about Gombrowicz places. Thanks all the staff of Witold Pilecki Institute. Thank you, our interpreters, and thank you for your job. And I would like to thank you, my colleagues, who helped me to arrange all this around me. And I would like to thank also Evelyn Tamman and Tomasz Tyczyński for these words from films we could hear, and it was the way we could also be in touch with them. Thank you, Evelyn, for your presence. I hope you all will remember about the other events. I hope our audience will be with us too. So be in touch with Gombrowicz in Berlin, and I hope we will meet soon. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.